Alright, in this video I'm going to be showing you a little bit about alteration. I'm obviously starting with a bowl here that I've already thrown, centered, shaped, cleaned off the water on the inside and the outside. Here I'm just very quickly dividing the bowl into quadrants from the inside, just gently pulling out the rim. This is going to make a square bowl. This would be the simplest kind of alteration you could do, making a round bowl have a square top. From here I'm going to do several alterations until I kind of alter this thing so much so that it's not really recognizable as a bowl anymore. You can see I'm just trying to show the inside of the bowl for you. If you're one of my students, I encourage you to explore with alteration. Maybe start with something simple like a 4-sided or 5-sided object. You could make a triangular bowl. You could make like a set of 5 or 6 7-sided bowl. We have the dividing discs that you used on your colander project. But right here what I'm doing is I'm taking those 4 corners and I'm just going in between those 4 corners to make an 8-sided object and making small little divots. This is me just playing. I didn't really have any thought in mind when I was altering this bowl. Right now I'm just making those corners round a little bit. I'm going to go around and do that on all 4 sides, and then I'm going to tighten up those little points. And this is going to kind of make a rounded star pattern. I'm not sure quite what to call it, but like I said, this is just experimenting, just whatever came to mind. I wanted to try with my hands. One thing that's important is that if you're going to touch the clay, your finger should be wet. So the inside of my finger does have a little bit of moisture on it. I'm making sure it doesn't stick. Here I'm grabbing my wooden rib. I wanted to make those points of those smaller parts a little sharper, not so round. So I'm just putting the edge of my wood knife to give it a point and kind of pinching the clay around the wood knife. That's going to give it a uniform point, so it's roughly the same size. And it's also just going to be a nice contrast to the rounded square corners that I just gave it. So here is a brief showing of what it looks like. You can see I've got those points to it. Alright, now I'm just going to play some more. I'm taking those points and dropping them in. What would it look like if I dropped those 4 points in? Maybe if I take these and turn them into points. And really I'm just taking this bowl to its maximum extreme. This is no longer really a useful shape or something functional. You might like how it looks. It might be as decorative. You could find a use for it, but this is just experimentation. And I'm pulling those corners back out. Sometimes it's nice just to not plan on keeping something and just keep playing with it, and you might discover a new shape, or you might discover a new technique or design, new to you anyways. And you're only going to find that by being a little fearless with your practice. Alright, so enough with this bowl. I'm going to cut it off the wheel and show you some more alteration here in a minute. Alright, so I'm really quickly just going to throw a cylinder. I'm going to be showing you a technique that's called faceting. It's really important that you have a thick cylinder and that the sides are cleaned off dry and straight. So you can see I didn't raise it very much. It's about maybe a ½ inch or a little bit less all the way through. It's a pretty thick cylinder. This is a great thing to try if it's difficult for you to raise a thinner cylinder, because you're already making something that's great for faceting. I'm using my wire tool, wrapping on my fingers a few times. You can either go down or up, but what I'm trying to do is cut a slice of clay off the pot. You can see I flicked that piece off. I'm turning it towards you so you can see it. I'm just cutting like a little facet off the side of that pot. I'm going to do a few straight facets, and then I can maybe play around. You can say I pulled a little section off. Usually I would do the same thing all the way around. I'm just doing a variety of techniques all kind of smashed together on one pot. So you can see that your facets don't necessarily have to be straight up and down. Your facets don't all have to be just a straight facet. They can have little chunks sticking out, and those all will do different things. This is a great thing to experiment with because throwing a thick cylinder isn't that hard to do, and if you can center it and get the clay going pretty quick, you can do this a few times. The last 2 facets I did it at an angle. I already kind of angled those facets. Now what I'm doing is stretching it out. When you facet something, you're not allowed to touch the outside afterwards. So what I'm doing with my fingers is I'm slowly pushing out with my fingers, going back up and down, spreading my fingers out, just widening the pot. As I widen this pot, those facets will start to twist and kind of do some interesting things. You can see here that they start to kind of twist and distort. As I stretch it out, you can see some more of the texture of the clay. This clay was intentionally kind of short. I'm going to take this, again, a little too wide so you can see what happens if you take it too far. One of the hardest things with ceramics is knowing when to stop. So I'm going to keep stretching this until it breaks. I can see it just ripped right there. You can see on one side I cut it a little thinner on that side, and it tore a little bit. So this bowl couldn't have been that wide. But it's important to realize to take things to the extreme until you break them, but then also to learn how to stop while you're ahead. All right, so this is another kind of alteration to the surface I'm going to do. I have a cylinder that I raised straight. I'm taking the mud off the outside, and then I'm going to use my rib, and I'm just going to kind of move my rib around and undulate my rib. This is just kind of wheel decoration. You can go up and down, move it around. I'm just creating kind of a surface texture or alteration. This is me kind of running my fingers up that alteration, seeing if I want it to be a little wider, what happens when it distorts. If I don't like it, it's pretty shallow, I can just run my rib up it again, smooth it out, maybe try a different decoration. Here what I did was I took the back end of my pin tool and I just kind of pushed it into the outside until you can kind of see some wavy lines behind it, and I just wave those lines around. I'm going to clean that off again. There's only so many times you can restart a cylinder. I'm going to push it to its limit again. But this is just me showing you just a few techniques that I use. There are literally hundreds of more wheel alteration techniques you can use. Here's one that I don't do a great job at, but I'm just showing you can also alter your forms by pressing on them. You can see I pressed in a mark and I'm just roughly dividing my pot into a few segments. This is a really easy way to make something look more like a flower, or to kind of have like a petal shape or texture. I could do this halfway up the pot and only have the bottom have these lines on it. I could turn it into like little sectioned tubes and alter this form. Some altered forms you do trim, some you don't. This is a form you could trim. If you had a problem centering it on the wheel, you could ask me and I could help you out if you're in my class, but this is just me experimenting and trying to discover a new technique. And this is not a pot that I really like or a pot that I would probably make again, but this is just me playing around. I've decided I'm going to make these, maybe see if I can make this top have a little bit of a lip shape, kind of how you'd make a pitcher. And I'll do that on all three sides, and that kind of is making each side like a little pouring spout. Looking at that, and I'm still not really satisfied with how it looks. I think going straight from a cylinder to this kind of petal shape is still leaving the bottom a little straight and sterile. It doesn't have the fullness that I would want it to have when I look at it. I could imagine the bottom being narrower or kind of having more of like a bullfrog's throat kind of wide form. So I'm deciding to kind of split in between those facets and do another little finger dent. So I'm going to turn this kind of three-sided object into a six-sided object. And again, this is not something that I really normally do or a shape that I like. Put my hand in it and to see what happens if I kind of try to straighten it out. What happens when I squeeze it afterwards? I choke it in. And I notice, I see it's kind of twisting. Do I want it to twist like that? Now I'm kind of straightening out the rim of the pot, watching it twist, seeing if anything interesting happens, coloring it in some more. And this is just really playing with a form. You're never going to really find a new technique that you like if you're not willing to mess a few pots up. So this is just me playing and experimenting, see if I like a certain technique or not. I decided to call it quits on this pot. It's had quite a few things done to its surface. There's really no coming back from the shape that I made it. You can see I'm really digging in deep with my wood knife, trying to give it kind of a little bit more lift from the bottom. And you can see that this form is pretty heavily distorted.
Yeah.
I'm making those little petals and kind of putting some petals back on it.
Are full of water.
This happens to me like when I'm even
It just seems like if it has such a twisty bottom, the top shouldn't be so straight and so rigid. But again, this is not something that I like. I'm just kind of trying to discover maybe a path I could go down. On your next project, you're going to be required to make a set of 4 objects, and maybe you want to make a random set of objects like this, and you want to experiment with twisting